Hi, this is Heidi Gaiman from ilovemyshepherd.com with another Mental Health Monday. The last 2 months we've been talking emotions, and today we're going to wrap that up, but also start our new series for the month of April on paradox and paradoxes in mental health and paradoxes in spirituality and how those things cave in and kind of mesh together in our lives and in our mental health in particular. So one thing I wanted to do is look at how our emotions and mental health and this idea of paradox are so interrelated. And I think because they're both super uncomfortable, we're kind of uncomfortable with our emotions, don't quite know what to think about them, and they're maybe a little hard to control and relegate. And also we don't always attach them to spirituality. Like sometimes we actually put them in juxtaposition against spirituality because God is constant and our emotions aren't, which isn't really necessary. God created our emotions. We've talked about that at length. So how about this idea of paradox? I would like to also propose that God created that also. The Google definition of paradox is a seemingly absurd or self-contradictory statement or proposition that when investigated or explained may prove to be well-founded or true. And so I love that, number one, that they use the word absurd, seemingly absurd. How often does that feel true? These ideas of paradox, these things that exist together but do not make sense. That's hands down what paradox is. These things that exist together but don't quite make sense to us, especially at face value right away, or even like when we talk in mental health world, the paradoxes exist before we recognize them, and we don't even know. Like we're not cognitively aware that we're kind of moving in and out of these paradoxes emotionally, spiritually, and mentally, and that can be really difficult to manage and to understand then our reaction to things and how they impact that. My husband always points out that there's a paradox and there's also duality, and they're super similar. I think this concept of duality is helpful to recognize, though. The quality or condition of being dual, that's super easy, thank you, Google, or an instance of opposition or contrast between two concepts or two aspects of something, a dualism. So this is, I really like the description in Google definitions is where a photograph uses both the concepts of light and dark. So can light and dark exist at the same time? Absolutely. So that's why the paradoxes aren't always against each other. So it helps us to understand that both paradox, but then this idea of duality, that they exist at the same time. And so what are some of those? And some of the ones we're going to talk in the coming week really butt up against those emotions, like suffering and faithfulness, or pain and joy. We'll also talk about now and not yet, or the sinner and saint. We'll talk about normal being also abnormal, and unique being typical. So those are some of the paradoxes we're going to hit on. For today, to introduce this idea, I want to introduce to you the idea of fearful yet wondering. Fearful yet wondering. So we exist in this world with a lot of questions. And you can actually find on the blog, a blog about Gideon, I just recently wrote a family devotion actually for all ages about this guy who had so many questions in the Bible. And that's so comforting to me that God allows our questions. He can take our questions. And so we exist in this place where we can be fearful and still be wondering about God. That doesn't mean that we're faithless against God. Instead, how do we exist where we're fearful, where we don't really want to know the answer? We don't really want to address the problem or the questions, but we're also wondering. We exist so often in those places. And so I would say what we want to do, and I recently took a class on spiritual trauma that was really useful, but one of the best concepts was just this idea of therapy, especially being about curiosity. And so we're going to enter into just curiosity. What, asking questions like, what are you doing today, God? Or where are you at in this, God? Or, sometimes we want to know, like, what path are you trying to show me, God? Or is this right or wrong, God? And sometimes we get a clear answer and sometimes we don't. We just keep opening the Bible, we keep praying, and we keep looking to experts. Remember, we talked before about getting, advice from friends, helping people discern with you, but then also seeking those mental health professionals and people like pastors who do give spiritual care and things, but knowing what experts kind of know their area is really helpful. But we just enter into it with curiosity. So that's how we deal with that paradox of fear, but with our wonder of God, our kind of awe of God, the holiness of God, if you will. And also just the questions that we have in this life. It's okay to have fear in that. It's okay to have anger and sadness and all those emotions we've been talking about in this paradox of fearful yet wondering. Fearful yet wondering. So excuse my puppies. Maybe what questions do you want to ask God? What questions come up for you? Or what's a helpful way that you found in addressing maybe some of those wondering, that paradox of wondering and fearfulness in your life. And so just knowing that paradox is part of the human existence, just like emotions are part of the human existence. Like, you can try to get away from them all you want. I mean, we can all try to become Vulcan, but that's not going to go well, right? We talked about how that's like, can we just either push it down or push it out? And that really takes its impact on our body and on our relationships. Instead, just recognizing them, being curious about them. Oh, there's an emotion, what's that look like? Not letting it lead us, but letting it inform us. So we also want to understand that paradox is part of the human existence. These questions, pain and suffering and joy and faithfulness, all mixed together. That crazy paradox of like all of that not quite making sense and existing at exactly the same time, that is part of the human experience. Like, we're all going to have suffering, we're all going to have joy, and in some moments we'll have them at the same time. Does that make any sense? I don't think it does. But it does. God has put that inside of us. And that's part of the experience that he gives us. Like, this is part of what it means to be people when he created us as humans and created us in relationship to experience it together. So it's kind of a cool thing. And I think also curiosity means like walking into it, leaning into it, asking questions of God, asking questions of those around us, leaning heavy on this people called the church. Sometimes they let us down. Let's be honest. Sometimes they let us down. We just tell people what you need. I promise you, there is a portion of the church that will show up in these hard questions, these hard emotions, and these paradoxes of life. And just that's loving God, moving forward, continuing to ask the questions. That in itself is loving God, and he will, bring his love to bear in our lives through his word, through his people. And it's such a beautiful thing to see. And I think without the big emotions and without the paradoxes, the questions and the struggles, and the not quite making sense, the mystery of God, if you will, we would be missing so much in life. We would be missing really who God is, and delving into that, and also just missing, big joy and the feeling of that human experience, I guess. So, paradoxes tend to butt up against our worth. Does God really love me? And we will delve into that in the coming weeks too. Butt up into, am I worthwhile? Whether you believe in God or not, that's an issue of paradox in our life. Why do bad things happen to good people? Do I really have a purpose here? Those kinds of questions. Just knowing that God is in that. He's in it. And we're going to walk through that. And then knowing that that does affect our mental health. It's so important that it affects our mental health, because someone once told me that all trauma is spiritual, and there will always be trauma involved in our spirituality this side of heaven. We live in a broken world, and there's so much brokenness. And I just led a retreat this weekend, and I was made aware again what all the brokenness looks like in so many different forms, but it's always there in our lives, in those around us. And just being aware of the beauty that God brings in that brokenness. That is the message of hope in Christ. There's so much beautiful that God can do with kind of this junk. And that he will make those very things beautiful sometimes. He is going to do something with it. He is in it. So just to wrap this up here, I want to give you a few fun cultural words to pique our curiosity about emotions and God. Sometimes the thing about paradox is we don't have words for it. And that's the same thing with emotion. A lot of times there's just no words for it. And we have to understand that we're pinned down by our own language. Whether that's English, what I'm currently speaking, or other languages. We all fail to have just the perfect amount of words and definitions and stuff for everything we need. And so I'm going to go ahead and make a post for I Love My Shepherd later today that has just like a little list from some stuff I Googled all over the internet, lots of different websites that helped, that has some different cultural words for things that we experience that might be really useful to have on hand that we don't have in English. But a couple of my favorite are nakama, which is a Japanese word for friends considered to be family. Friends considered to be family. Like, I think we need those people in our life, and I love that it's so relational. And then, let's see, misliness. Misliness is actually a Scot word, a Scot term, from Scotland. A feeling of aloneness from missing someone after they visited. I just love that. That's so you have that specific instance. There's also one associated with being really nervous or anxious before someone visits because you're trying to organize everything and stuff. Those kind of transitions. And that tells me, too, how important visiting and being part of one another's lives, even across the distances, is in our mental health, too. That there's words and other languages for these things. So, all right, I'll stop talking. It's been a little bit of a long one. If you have any questions, I hope you'll continue to join us about paradox, and we'll continue to touch on those emotions and the spirituality of paradox, as well as how it impacts our mental health in the coming month. There will be no Mental Health Monday on Easter Monday, the day after Easter. I will be off and doing something. And then we will actually end at the end of April, and then I will introduce to you what we're going to be studying and looking through after the summer when the fall comes up. So it's great to be with you. If you need any resources, check out our mental health page at ilovemyshepherd.com, and I'll see you next time.